Jason's mom and I, Kathy and I, well, we met 32 and a half years ago. And we dated, we got married 2.5 years later. Jason was born 1.5 years after that. And as our marriage progressed, we sort of went through the phases that I'm sure a lot of you guys went through in your own marriages, those of you who are married. You have that your honeymoon time and everything seems really great. But then things started to get progressively not so great. Right? And what I wanted to share with Jason and Isha this morning, or this afternoon I should say, is how you get through those times. Because it's so easy to see all the joy and the happiness of marriage, and to think of marriage in terms of the good times and how we're going to love each other forever and ever, and to forget that there's going to be those rough times. And the question is, how do you get through those rough times? The Apostle Paul wrote, "Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church." But I don't know if you've ever really thought about where the church was when Jesus was being nailed to the cross. And the answer is the church was right there by his side, helping to drive the nails into his hands and into his feet. He loved the church when the church was unlovable. He loved the church when the church did not deserve to be loved. He loved each of us when we did not deserve to be loved. And he offers us an opportunity to come to him and to be forgiven for whatever is wrong, even if we don't deserve to be forgiven. And Jason and Isha both know that there will be times in their lives when Jason will look at Isha and say, "I really don't know why I married you." And if we're all honest, we've probably had those times in our own relationships. I know I have with my wife. But I also tell you that right now, there have been times in our lives when, we fought so bitterly that my sister-in-law Janice refused to ride in the car with us. Because once we got in the car, all we would do was fight. Right? But you get through those times if you hang on to what your role is. Jesus loved the church in the sacrificial role when the church didn't deserve it, when the church didn't merit it. And your commitment, Jason, to Isha is to love her in that same selfless way. Even if you don't feel like she is worthy of your love. It's to love her, you're making a commitment to love her thick or thin, whether you feel like it, whether you don't feel like it. If you look at the history of the church throughout the years, what you see is that the church has frequently not lived up to God's expectations for it. You go in all the things that we do wrong. And how does Jesus respond to that? Jesus waits for the church to come to the place where he needs for it to be. He loves the church, he nurtures it, he provides for its needs. When Jesus was being nailed to the cross, the thing that he said about those who were doing the nailing was, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what to do." That's the kind of sacrificial love that God is calling Jason to have for Isha, loving the church, loving Isha the way that Christ loves the church. Isha, your role in the marriage is really, really very similar. The book of Genesis describes the creation of woman. And it describes the creation of both man and woman in two different places in the first few chapters. First, it talks about that we were created during when God creates everything. God creates man and woman, makes them in the image of God, and says that it's very good. But then there's a second account, and the second account provides more detail about how men and women were created. And first, it says the man was created, and God looked at the man and said, "Not good." And a lot of you women would probably agree with that. But he looks at the man and says, "Not good that he should be alone." And so he creates woman for man. And unfortunately, we have a word in our Bible, we translate it that says that God created woman to be man's helper. And that causes us a problem because that sounds like, you think of, a carpenter who is the guy that knows what he's doing, and then you have the carpenter's helper who's, just kind of the second stand-in sort of fellow that's not very skilled, the lesser in the relationship. But in the original text, in the Hebrew, the word there is the word ezer. The word for helper is the word ezer. And it's a Hebrew word. It only occurs in the Bible 21 times. And in every case, it's the kind of help that comes from God. It's the name that God uses for himself. When God says to Israel, "Do not fear, Israel, I will be your helper. I am your helper." That's that same word, ezer. It's used when it talks about, I raised my eyes to the hills where my help comes. My help comes from the Lord. It's that kind of divine help. So rather than thinking of it as some sort of glorified servant or some sort of second, class citizen. What it's really talking about, the woman being, is God's representative, or perhaps God's ambassador in that relationship. And when you think of it that way, you can see that your responsibilities towards Jason are very much the same as Jason's responsibilities towards you, in that you're God's representative in your relationship. You're his ambassador. You need to love Jason in the same way that Jason needs to love you, selflessly, when he doesn't deserve it. Because just like there's times when he'll look at you, there's going to be times when you're going to look at him and you're going to think, gosh, I can't even imagine why I married that guy. And again, I'm sure, I know, because she's told me, that Kathy felt that way about. And it's important that you know that, so that you don't get surprised, so that you don't like think, oh, why is this happening? This is just not working. Marriage isn't supposed to be this way. Marriage is that way. There are times when you'll be at each other's throats, and you need to get through those times. And you need to keep loving each other, and keep caring for each other, and nurturing each other through those times. Because the truth is, you will get through those times. Kathy and I are closer now than we've ever been. And we got through those times, and you can get through those times too. You don't have to give up. And that brings the third piece into the equation. The third piece that we talked about at some length was what it means to be committed to each other. This society today doesn't understand commitment. You know, we enter into relationships and out of relationships. We enter into agreements and out of agreements. We have all these legal ways of breaking agreements. Commitment says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. And even though you have these great and lofty ideas right now about how, okay, I'll be there for you even when you're not there for me and all that stuff. When you get into the heat of it, you won't feel that way. You won't feel like loving her even though you don't think she deserves it. You won't feel like loving him even though you think he doesn't deserve it. Those things won't be natural. And in times like that, that's when your commitment will keep you through. Because if you make it clear to who you are, that you're the person who does what you say that you're going to do, no matter what, even if you don't feel like doing what you say that you're going to do, that gives you the strength to get through those times when you really don't feel like doing it. Kathy's and my darkest times weren't while we were still here in the United States. Shortly after Mark was born, a long time ago, I shipped out to England, and we were in England for 3 years. At about the 2-year point, our relationship hit rock bottom, and I left. I said I'd had enough. And I left the wife and kids. I was kind. I left in the car. I decided I was going to hitchhike down to the base, and I said I was done. I was going to check in the building. I was going to check into the on-base housing, and I had enough. I wasn't doing this anymore. And I got partway to the base, and a very unusual thing for me happened. I've been a Christian for more than 30 years, and in those 30 years, I can only say that God has reached down and said something to me that I really knew was Him maybe 6 times. And this was one of those 6 times. And God said 7 things to me, 7 words to me. He said, if you leave her, you leave me. Because the other person that you're making a commitment before today is God. You're committing to each other, and you're also committing to God that you're going to be that way to Jason. And Jason, you're going to be that way to Isha. You're making this promise to each other, and you're making this promise to God. And that's important. It's important because when God said that to me, I don't think God was saying, if you leave her, you're going to go to hell and burn forever. I think what He was doing was He was reminding me that I'd made a promise to Him too. And I might not feel like keeping my promise to her. I might be able to rationalize in my mind, well, she did this, she deserves it, whatever. I have no way to rationalize that to God. Because while I was yet a sinner, He died for me. He gave me what I didn't deserve. He reached out to me when I didn't deserve it. And there's no way I can tell Him, you deserve me leaving her. I mean, that just wasn't going to happen. And so I turned around and I went home. And it's a good thing that I did, because if I hadn't, then Hannah would not be here. She wasn't born yet. But we made promises to each other. We made commitments to each other. And it was those commitments to each other and to God that brought us through.